Now this is the last morning session of our first New York practitioner group. We call it the practitioner group because it is not the regular closed class, and this group consists of those more active, or perhaps more active or more studious than a regular class of students might ordinarily be. It not only is the last session of this morning group, but there is only one more session left of the evening closed class, first New York closed class. And so it becomes a very necessary thing that we understand before we leave here this morning what it is that we are supposed to understand of this week's work. Every class in the infinite way from the very beginning has produced a facet of truth, a theme of truth of its own. Not that you can separate truth from truth, not that you can divide truth, but you can speak of God as love, and another time speak of God as law. Another time you can speak of God as presence or God as power, and even come to the place of speaking of God as non-power. That is not dividing God, because you're not separating any one of those talks from the whole. It is only that no one session is long enough to encompass the unfoldment of the whole of God at one session. As a matter of fact, one lifetime isn't long enough to unfold the wholeness of God. Now, this week's work in the morning group and in the evening closed class group has, beyond any question, been the most powerful of any infinite way classes ever held, anywhere, anytime. The reason is that this week's work is something like a culmination, a climax to all of the years of work that have gone before. I will illustrate that in this way. Right in the original book, The Infinite Way, you will find that the ultimate of our wisdom is that God is. In Spiritual Interpretation of Scripture, which was the second book, you will find that the entire theme is God is. Now, after 10 major books and 10 booklets, we come to a place where the theme of the class is God is, where actually the entire idea of God is unfolded in its practical use. In other words, it is almost boiled down to thimble size. We've gone through 10 books and 10 booklets to bring to light that which was the original idea. Now that original idea is brought out in a forceful or concrete form, held up to us so that we could do away with the whole 10 books and 10 booklets and sum them all up in our understanding, if we have caught this week's work, of God is. It is like studying the multiplication table and after learning it, throwing it away, because we now know 2 times 2 are 4, or 12 times 12 is 144, and we no longer need to go through all that endless rehearsal and memorizing. We don't even have to go through figuring out that 2 times 2 are 4, 2 times 2 are 1, and 1 times 2 is 2, and so forth, and then adding up and saying it's 144. Now we cut right through and say 12 times 12 is 144. And so with this, we start out with God is, and we go through 10 large books and 10 small booklets, and come back to the fact that God is, and that it all can be said in 2 words instead of going through all of those processes. Now, just like 12 times 12 is 144 includes the 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 1 is 2, and 1 times 2 is 2, and 1 times 1, and the addition, so does the statement God is include all that's in those 10 large books and 10 small books. So that you could not go out on the street or have a patient come to your house and just say, God is. If there's anything they've always believed, it is that God is. But it hasn't done them much good believing it. Probably every person in the world, even those who think of themselves as agnostics, somewhere along the line can be convinced that God is, or is already convinced that God is, but that's a meaningless term. Until you know all that's in those 10 books and 10 booklets, then you come back and say, oh, God is. Ah, yes, that is a different wisdom than your Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu who says, why, God is. You will only notice that difference as you review this week's work. Now, one thing has become clear. That since God is, that nothing else is. Nothing else exists. Nothing else has presence. Nothing else has power. There is only God. And it is possible even to eliminate the word God from that term and just say is. Because that which is, that which is all that is. And the only time that anything can be is now. Is cannot take place yesterday. Is cannot take place tomorrow. The only place for is and the only time for is here and now. Nothing is except here, and nothing is except now. In that realization then, we are released instantly from any attempt, mental or physical or spiritual, to make anything happen or appear. Now there is the miracle of this week's work, that while we have known that God is, at least agreed that God is, also we have undertaken to heal, reform, enrich, employ through some kind of mental or spiritual process. Whereas now we are released from that in the realization of is. You cannot make something happen in the future if now is the only time. And if now is God's time, you cannot even make something happen now. The whole practice now becomes the continuous recognition of is. Infinity is, immortality is, life is, harmony is, wholeness is, completeness is, whatever you want is. See how we go back to the original infinite way where it says, that which I am seeking, I am. And yet, we've gone all through these years trying to become I am, trying to become spiritual, trying to overcome mortal sense. And that was right. Our students will still have that to do. They still will have that to do until they come to this sense. Just because the professors in the graduating class of the university know all the answers, they cannot save the students going through 4 years or 8 years to find it out. And just because we come to a state of consciousness where the weight falls off the shoulders, and we say, oh, I have no responsibility toward this world. I have no responsibility toward saving anyone. God's work is done now. God's work is done. Completeness is, perfection is, harmony is. What about this world of error? Now I see. That is the illusion of sense. And that goes on and will go on forever in the mind of those who have the sense of separation from God and the sense that there is a selfhood apart from God to be redeemed, to be saved. Now that I have come to this state of consciousness, I am a light unto all who turn to me. I cannot be a light running around the universe looking for someone to light up any more than a lighthouse has a right to run around the ocean looking for ships. We stand still, and the ships seeking guidance come right by the lighthouse. And we stand still and let the world come to our door, the world of those ready. You see, readiness for spiritual unfoldment is a matter of grace. It is not a matter of free will. There isn't anyone in this room who has the power in and of themselves to say, I am going to sit down and study 8 hours a day. They just do not have that power. Those that have that power haven't it of themselves. It has come to them through grace. Now, there's no use finding fault with a person who says, somehow I don't have time to study truth. They are right. They don't have time. Because the time is already filled with other things, and the hunger and the thirst for truth has not yet appeared. And there's no use trying to fill their hours with truth any more than there is use trying to fill a person's hour with food who has already eaten. They won't appreciate it. It won't taste good no matter how many hours you've given to the cooking of it or preparing of it. And so with this, no one is going to appreciate truth except in proportion to their hunger and thirst for it. And that comes through divine grace, often manifested as an acute need for it. One person finds an acute need for God or for something to fill a void. Another one has an acute need to be healed of a disease. Another one has an acute need to be healed of unhappiness or lack. Whatever that acute need is divine grace, because it is compelling them to come home to the Father. It is drawing them home like the final meal with the swine drove the prodigal son home. That was an evidence of grace, that coming down to eating with the swine. And so is our sins, our diseases, our lack, an evidence of grace, because it is that point that drove us to the work. So do not try to save your patients or your students the interval of the development of consciousness through which you've gone, because you cannot succeed. It would be a wonderful thing if it were true that Jesus' crucifixion could save us all the troubles of life. It would be true if any of us could make some supreme sacrifice and know that all our friends and relatives and neighbors were going to jump into heaven. But so far there is no sacrifice that we can make that even will bring our own husband or wife or child into it, until in the moment of their hunger and their thirst for truth. And so do not shock the young student or patient with such absolute statements of truth that they cannot absorb them. And certainly do not expect of them that even though you tell it to them and repeat it tomorrow and repeat it the next day, that they are going to understand it. It is a breaking through the intellectual sense until it penetrates consciousness. And finally they say, oh, I see, and finally tell you something that you've been telling them for years. They've just discovered it. They've discovered it as something entirely original that you probably don't know. And they're going to come and share a great treasure with you. just something you've been telling them for years and they haven't grasped. But now it comes to them as their own unfoldment, as their own consciousness from within, and they don't even recognize that that's what you've been saying to them over and over again. Now, so it is. We, from this week's work, must come to the word is. And in coming to the word is, it is as if we were to say, yes, all already is, harmony already is, and rest in that. But also, through this week's work, you must come down from cloud 9, come down at least to cloud 7, and acknowledge that there are appearances contrary to the state of is. Acknowledge that we are dealing with sick and sinning human race of people. Acknowledge that we are dealing with a sense of selfhood apart from God, and that at this moment something in our individual work must be done about it. Do not sit up there on cloud 9 and just say, God is. No, because that will not be a help to those who come to us. Nor will it enable you to rise to a healing consciousness. Never wipe out the Master Christ Jesus' ministry. Art thou he that should come? He is asked. Go show John what things ye have seen. The sick are healed. The dead are raised. To the poor the gospel is preached. He wasn't being very absolute there, was he? He was acknowledging a selfhood and a condition apart from God that had to be, through some vision, redeemed. He had a message and he had a mission, but it was to the sick, to the dead, to the sinning, and to those in ignorance of spiritual life. Again, in Matthew 25, he indicates clearly those who the Father will recognize in heaven and those who will be set aside, the wheat and the chaff. And he tells who they will be. When I was in prison, he comforted me. He visited me. When I was sick, he comforted me. When I was naked, he clothed me. When I was hungry, he fed me. When, Lord, saw we thee in prison? When saw we thee sick? When saw we thee naked? Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Now that is exactly the same as if we were to acknowledge this. You are the Christ of Beal. You are the Christ of God. God and you are one. God and the Father is one. God is manifest spiritually as the Son, as your true identity, your true being. But Jesus is willing to admit that you have a sense of selfhood apart from that, and that you have been busy using fishing nets to get your living, whereas you were joined heirs with Christ and God and never needed to do that labor. He was also willing to concede that you had a sense of sin that got you into prison. You had a sense of disease. You had a sense of separation from good. And his recognition of your true identity was his mission. And the Father's recognition of that brought him into heaven, or the awareness of harmony. And so with us, if we are in the spiritual ministry, have a message and a mission. Neither of those could be performed unless we started with the word is. God is your true being. Christ is your true identity. Whom do ye say that I am? You know that I am the Christ. Who do I say that you are? I know that you are the Christ. That is your true identity. Now, in the recognition of that is Christhood, I am faced with your sick, sinning, dead appearance. And the question is, what am I to do with that? Because my whole mission depends on my understanding of what to do with these appearances called sick and sinful humanity. Now, that which separates the Christ ministry, the Christ understanding from humanhood is this: the realization that this world of appearances is not of my kingdom, is not of the spiritual kingdom, is not spiritual reality. None of these appearances ever take place in heaven. None of these things. If the volcano came and wiped us all out, or the atomic bomb, none of that would change one single thing in heaven. God's kingdom would still be intact on earth as it is in heaven. Why? Here it comes. All of this that we behold as humanhood represents a mental concept taking place in human thought. Not so much your individual human thought as that, but in the universal belief which we individually accept by virtue of having been born. Just to have been conceived and born into this world brings the entire human world as our world. That is what constitutes our human misconceptions, the fact that we were physically conceived and born. That was our entrance into the whole world of misconception. Now we have to die. Now we have to die so that we can be reborn. But we know now that it isn't going to do us any good to die physically any more than it has done us any good to be born physically. Now, here is one of the mysteries that Mrs. Eddy saw that she had to hide from the world. She saw that there's nothing very noble about human birth or bringing babies into the world. She saw that, she recognized it, she had a good deal to say about it. But it shocked the world so terribly, and it shocked, it outraged the human sense of motherhood to such an extent that she had to soft pedal it. And now you can only see it by inference in her writing, as where she says that marriage must continue in this age, that the natural way of conception and birth and marriage must go on for this age. But read that article very carefully, Wedlock, in Miscellaneous Writings, and note there how clear it is that the day will come when marriage will not have to take place for human conception or human birth. Many times she told her students, she called babies by very rough names, names that mothers don't like to hear about their little ones. But she was very clear on that they are mortal brats until such time as through a transformation of consciousness they entered the realization of their spiritual identity. Now, we know that Scripture is true not because it's in those books, but those books are in existence because somehow truth had to be preserved. As the Master said, my words will never pass away. Not necessarily that every word in Scripture is true, but all the truth that is true is in those scriptural books. And one thing is sure, that we are called upon to die, and that merely dying in the flesh has never solved a problem. Our death must take place within our consciousness. I die daily, says Paul, and that death takes place within our consciousness so that we may be reborn of the Spirit. And of course the old stupid question is asked the Master too, and it's asked us here, how can I be reborn? Can I go back to my mother's womb? No, it isn't that kind of a birth. It is the birth and rebirth that takes place as transformation in consciousness, or the term I use is transition. It's a transition from one state of being to another, from one state of consciousness to another. It's the transition that takes place as you begin to perceive that nothing out here is supply, that supply is entirely invisible, and that what appears out here, whether it's dollar bills or flowers, is but the visible effect of supply. And all these buildings that we have in New York, or all these modern cities of the world, they are not supply. They could easily be wiped out, and nothing would be lost. because the supply of that is in consciousness. And if you destroy this temple, in 3 days, the same consciousness that placed them there will refill them. Now realize that about your personal fortunes or about your body. If through some unbelief, disbelief, ignorance, your body has been destroyed, or your fortune or your home, don't be concerned with it. That is just as if you had a crop of fruit and eaten it, or the wind had blown it away, or you'd given it away, and now you're ready for a new crop of fruit, and your tree is available. It will be there. And if the winds blew the tree away, there's life in the earth, and it will develop more trees. Always, that which is the original essence or substance, consciousness, is always present. So regardless of what effect disappears, recognize immediately it is only effect. Cause is invisible. Cause is always invisible. Even the seed isn't the cause. That which produced the seed is the cause, and the seed isn't even necessary. The crops in Genesis were in the ground before there were any seeds. Now, Vaudeville used to think it very funny when a comedian said, which came first, the chicken or the egg? There's nothing funny about that at all. Which came first, the crop or the seed? Well, now there's something. If the seeds were first, how'd they get on earth? If the crops were first, how did they get on earth? And the answer is, who cares? What difference does it make? Consciousness is the source. Consciousness could just as well appear as a full-grown plant and produce a seed for the next generation as it could to produce a seed and then produce the flower. And the same as Genesis explains the creation of man. Adam wasn't born as a baby. He's a full-grown man, and then comes the seed. Well, the point is not whether or not the story of Adam is true, not whether or not the crops were in the ground before the seed. The point is that consciousness is the source. Consciousness is the source of all emanation, all form, all figure, all effect. Consciousness is the source. Now, once you realize that, when you say is, you are not talking about an effect. When you say is now, you are talking about consciousness. You are talking about the source of all it is. You're not looking at a sick person and saying, you are well. You are not looking at depletion and saying you are completion. When you say is, you are talking about God, consciousness, source, cause, and noting that it is. Now it's just a question of our degree of consciousness, whether it is going to take 40 days for the crop to appear, or in the realization of is, that the crop may instantaneously appear. It need not take 40 days for our demonstration. But if it does, don't be concerned about it. That merely represents the degree of our ability to perceive the is already manifest. It may well be that we are fortunate people if we are of those who know is, consciousness is, cause is, even though it now becomes necessary to let this truth operate in our consciousness for a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, until the fruitage of it begins to appear. Just as, regardless of how many years ago you first came to the study of truth in any one of its forms, and now are commencing to see its fruitage, think back and say, even though it has taken 10 or 20 years, just think where I am now, and no more does that have to be going through. And so it is, if your patient or your student doesn't have an instantaneous healing, or if they do not grasp truth in the first class, or the first year of class, or the 10th year, do not let that concern you. You be loving and you be patient. You forgive 70 times 7 their dropping away, because that is our nature. That has been our nature. Until you grasp it, you cannot be expected to be absolutely true to it. There will be fallings away. There will be dropping away. That has nothing to do with us as teachers. With us, it has to do with accepting all those who come to us, even if they are returning after the 70th time. Of course, it is true that there are degrees of things like the Judas idea, which you cannot immediately accept back into your circle, but you can accept them back on the outer fringe, always giving of the best. There we come to a matter of something very important for those who are in the work. There are always those whom you recognize as serious students who want a great deal of your time, effort, and thought. And it is those to whom you wish to give the utmost of yourself. And sometimes you're puzzled because there are others also demanding a lot of that time. And you wonder, how can all this be done? And here is the thing that has formed itself in my work. There are those to whom I give much time, much effort, much stress, because I not only feel that they are hungering and thirsting deeply after truth, but they indicate so by their actions. They are not the kind that merely take up all your time and let you pour out on them. You can witness by the way they talk to you that when they aren't with you, they're studying hard, they're reading hard, they're listening hard. They are putting themselves in. They're not merely coming as a blotter to absorb what you've got and then going away and waiting to come back the next time, a fresh blotter. Now, when I note students that make it very evident that they, and you can tell in their questions and talk, that they are really putting in time, effort, study, devotion, those are the ones to whom I give myself the most. The others, less and less and less, all the way down to those who never get an opportunity for an appointment. Very often you'll hear people say, I don't know how you ever get to see Joel, he just won't see anybody. And then you can know that so far as Joel is concerned, they have made it evident that all they are wanting is the healing of the moment, and they are putting nothing of themselves into this activity. Now, I don't refuse them. They can phone me, and they can come to public lectures, and they can come to closed classes, but they have a very difficult time getting a personal appointment. And the only reason is that they are giving no evidence that they are putting themselves into this thing, or that God is their aim, rather than that which can be attained through God. I don't mind telling you that my judgment is not infallible. I have taken in and been taken in. I have had lots of those to whom I have given time, attention, thought, effort, who have not fulfilled themselves because I would rather make the mistake in that direction than barring anyone who might possibly be sincere in their endeavors. That is why those who have been with us in our different classwork have seen not only that we have a closed class, or not only that we will have a morning session like this, but you know, in some cities we've had 3 sessions a day, and occasionally 4. Oh yes, occasionally a little group has come at midnight to the room and decided that 3 sessions during the day wasn't enough. I don't mind that. I really love it. I really love it because that is keeping me in the companionship of people who are really seeking God. Now, I can remember back in the days when it was difficult for me to sit through a lecture of Dr. DeLon. It was simple to sit through some of the other lectures, but very difficult to sit before Kilpatrick or DeLon. Why? Those were men of deep vision. Those were men of a deep message. And a half hour of them would be about as much as I would want to take. Well, it is exactly the same you will find now. There are people who cannot take this work for more than a half hour or an hour at a time. And that just fills them up for a long, long time. Then you will find others who can really take it for 6 hours and 8 hours and 10 hours. And those are the ones who are not seeking demonstration. They are seeking this inner unfoldment of God, of the realization of the real truth of being for its own sake. You see, it becomes very clear after a while that there is nothing to be gained from this search but God itself. Because if a lot of health and a lot of wealth were added, you wouldn't know what to do with them anyhow. You would have no awareness of health. You're just aware of a body that seems to function. Wealth you would have no use for because you can only eat these 3 simple meals and a very simple place to live. And very soon you learn, well, there is nothing to be accomplished by this except the joy of God and the companionship of those who are finding themselves in and of God. Now, we who glimpse one tiny bit of is become the light unto a certain part of the world. And we have the right to judge or bar those seeking that light. We only must divide up that which is of our so-called human time, so that we give the utmost of it to those deeper in hunger and thirst after truth rather than after effect, and the rest of it for those who are coming to that point through seeking the demonstration of health, harmony, wholeness, and the things of the world. Be wise in that. Be very wise. Another thing, if it's of any benefit to you, right from the first day that I entered the practice, I made a rule that no one could be on my phone more than 3 minutes, unless it were a very unusual circumstance. The general rule is 1 minute or 2 minutes on my telephone, with a maximum of 3. Not that I time it, but you very quickly get to see where you are going. Why must this be true? The telephone must be kept open for the next one. People must not be permitted to call 6, 8, 10, 12 times and find the line busy or find that they cannot reach you. Because the function of reaching out is to touch your consciousness. And that's all there is in it. There is no need for a person to rehearse their family history or their bodily history. It may relieve them on the first visit or on the first talk to unburden. But after that, there is no excuse, except in the unusual circumstance, for anything that 1, 2, or 3 minutes can't, or 4 minutes can't take in. In the rehearsal of the error that was repeated to you yesterday is not only a waste of time, but it is a preventative of healing. There's only one thing for a person to do once they've unburdened themselves of their problem, and that is thereafter seek truth, not seek a rehearsal of their error. So when they call, it should either be to ask for some more help or for some more truth. And anyone can give a truth in 2 or 3 minutes, sufficient to the need of that moment. As I say, there are exceptions that come up in individual problems, but wisdom shows you those. I'm speaking now of the rule. Too many practitioners permit 10 and 15 and 20-minute conversations on their line, and then if they were to ever hear the recorder play back, they'd say, and I'm supposed to be a truth practitioner. And there isn't any truth that was on that phone. In other words, it is not the rehearsal of the error that brings healing. It is the devotion of truth, of consciousness to truth, and the opportunity for it to be acted. And so the individual who merely is calling to rehearse the error is not only depriving themselves, they're depriving you, and they're depriving the rest of your patients or students. Your recognition is, so what difference does all this other business make? Now, we have is, but we also have these appearances. And now as you go back through the writings, you will see that I have shown all form of error to be appearance, suggestion, or temptation. Now watch that as you read back in the writings. Never have I acknowledged any form of error as an entity or an identity. Always you will find 3 words in there: appearance, suggestion, temptation. Is any one of those 3 a thing or a person? No. Where can a suggestion be? In human thought. Where can a temptation be? in human thought? Where can an appearance be in human thought? Does any of those three have substance, or reality, or a law? No. Now watch. That is the point upon which we deviate from those who call themselves absolutists. We never can be absolute for that reason. We are absolute in our realization that is, and is now, and is all that is, and is a spirit, life, truth, love. On that we are agreed. But we do recognize that out here is the sinner, the sick, the dead, the poor in spirit, the ignorant, the unillumined. We acknowledge that that exists, not as reality. No, how could God ever have created a sick person? How could God ever have created an old person, a withered person, a poor person? There's no such thing. But, so far as we are concerned, they exist as long as something up here sees, hears, tastes, touches, or smells them. As long as they keep coming to our consciousness, they exist. But they do not exist as entity or identity. They do not exist as person or thing. They exist as suggestion, temptation. If you will notice, the Master has 3 temptations in one place. But think not for a moment that those were his only temptations. We are continuously being reminded that Satan left him for a season. Always Satan came back to the Master. Satan was with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, tempting him to believe in sleeping disciples, tempting him to believe in approaching tests, death. Whereas all the time in God's kingdom no such thing could have happened. Let this pass from me. Let what pass from me? Temptation. Not a thing, not a condition. Temptation. Temptation to believe that I may go through even a temporary experience of death or disgrace. And so, as long as you are faced with this world, you will be faced with Satan, tempting you to believe in those in prison, those in sin, those in sickness. And until you come to the point of rebirth, you will be accepting them as something to do something about, instead of just knowing the truth about it. You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And the truth is. All else, mental concepts. A mental concept has no substantial form. It has only an illusory form. A mental concept, a temptation, a suggestion, has only the appearance has only the substance of temptation. To accept it, believe in it, and try to do something about it. Now, when someone says, I am ill, and you say, but that's an illusion, you have given the treatment. Now you can't sit down and do something to an illusion any more than if you were to think that that flower pot is full of green snakes, and then said, they're not snakes, that's illusion. You couldn't then sit down and give yourself a treatment. That is the treatment, the recognition that what you thought was evil had only an illusory or non-existence. That is the treatment. There is no treatment after you have recognized a so-called condition or person. The moment you recognize that they only exist as temptation, your treatment is over. That is what constitutes treatment. The realization that since is, all else is not. That is the treatment. Now come to that realization, even if you have to sit down for an hour and argue to yourself and remind yourself of all the statements of truth you know. Remember that you are not removing or changing something out here. You are not saving a person's life, and you are not reducing their fever. You are coming to a point of conviction within yourself that is. Now, there is a process that is very helpful in arriving at the realization that results in healing. And it is out of this class that for the first time this realization has really been made practical. We began with this on the last trip to Hawaii, and there are a dozen of our students there who have been working with it ever since August. But this is the first class into which it has been brought to light. You will find in new Hawaiian series, you will find the summary of the truth of being as it is known in the infinite way, ending on tape 4 with God is. And you will find that that series gives us this summary plus the beginning of the is. Then in second Hawaiian series, you will see it carried forth, and in all of these New York tapes, morning and evening class, you will find the whole thing brought to a head, so that you will be brought through these to this point. When you behold, through seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling, any form of error, you will not deny it. Never, never, never again deny it. Never again. I am now looking at a pot full of dangerous snakes. That's the picture that's being presented to me. Green snakes. And I know the destructive nature of them, the deadly nature of them. I've read about it in books, and I've known people who've been bitten by it and died quickly in pain. That I know. Now remember, it doesn't make any difference whether that's it, or whether over here is somebody with cancer or consumption or poverty. Because I also know all about the incurability of cancer and the horridness of consumption and the ferocity of sin. And ordinarily in my metaphysical life, I am tempted to say, it isn't true. God never made it. And after all these years of doing that, still keeps bobbing up continuously, the same old thing, and not all of it being met either, not all of it being healed. And I wonder, is there something wrong in my approach? Now I know there is. I know that there is no need of denying that. And I know that there is no benefit in denying it and no healing power in denying it. Why? For the simple reason that just saying there are no snakes there doesn't do anything to that beautiful plant. That beautiful plant still is a beautiful plant. And just saying there are no snakes there doesn't do anything to me either. Because denying it doesn't fill me with the realization of what is there. It still doesn't reveal a plant. If anything, it just makes a vacuum. I don't know that there's a plant there. And I'm denying that there are snakes there because I've got nothing. Now I have discovered a great miracle in the healing work. And this applies not only to healing, it applies to our living. It has changed life completely. Now, when I am confronted with a dish of snakes or cancers or consumption, I can look at it and say, It is. I'm not going to deny it now. Now I know better. I know right well that I wouldn't be seeing snakes if there was nothing there. So there's something there. And whatever is there is there. And my denying it isn't going to change it one single bit. And so I'm going to look right into that den of snakes. And I'm going to say, yes. You are. You are. You do exist. There is something there that is an activity of my consciousness. There is something there that is an activity of God consciousness. I can't deny you. I must acknowledge you. Is. God is. You are. I don't know what. I don't know why. I don't know the nature of your being. But I know that you are being, Because I see you there. I feel you there. I know you're there. I smell you there. You exist. You are there. All right, now, Father, what am I beholding? Now I have set up a vacuum. I've acknowledged the present. I haven't set up a vacuum out there. I haven't got a world of nothingness now to be eliminated. I haven't got a world out here that's an illusion that I want to get rid of. Oh, no, no. Now I've got is out here. Is made manifest. God, consciousness made manifest. That's what I've got. Even though I don't yet know its name or nature. But it is, I see it, it is. You are. All right, now, Father, what? And inside of me, I have made room for the Father to reveal to me what is, and all of a sudden my eyes clear. Oh, beautiful plan. And so, where there was a cancer, where there was consumption, where there was paralysis, instead of wiping it all out and saying, oh, just an illusion, which does nothing to anybody, now I know, since God is, God fills all space. And so there is something there. And it's of God. I don't know its name or nature. But whereas before I saw darkly through a glass, now by acknowledging that I'm seeing something through a glass and turning to the Father for what is, all of a sudden the appearance, the false appearance, goes and I behold him as he is. Now I'm satisfied with that likeness. Now that is the completeness, the revelation of this week's work. This is the full culmination of what began in Hawaii on a certain morning when I was trying to teach this very thing to one of our students, and there was a barrier. It did not get across. And we were at breakfast. Sitting on the table was a jar, a little glass jug of maple syrup. And all of a sudden I looked down at it, and I said, what is this? Syrup. It is? Yes, certainly. You know it is? Yes. How about a little prayer to make it syrup? No, we can't have that. It is syrup. Well, how about a little spiritual treatment? Make it syrup. No, it is syrup. You insist on that. Yet all the time I want a treatment for syrup. And you won't give it to me? How can I? It is syrup. And I had the whole secret. It is. God is. If God is harmony, perfection, no amount of treatment will make it so, but what we call treatment, spiritual realization, reveals it. That's the dying to appearances and the rebirth to seeing through a glass darkly and then ultimately face to face. That is spiritual regeneration. When you stop denying this world, stop calling it an illusion. The only illusion about this world is our concept of this world. This world is God expressed. Now never deny. Never bring it out. And please, don't teach this yet. Do not teach it to a living soul until you have demonstrated it so completely that you never again can lose it. Wait, be patient with it. Let it take a year if necessary, until you can look at 6 automobiles smash right up in front of you and say, is, thank you, Father. Then you will be prepared to teach it. You see, this has been the state of consciousness that's been with me ever since 1930, and yet only came to this head of is looking at a jug of syrup that already was syrup, that couldn't be made so, even by the finest treatments or the finest metaphysicians we could know. This is God's universe. And that is what Jesus came to reveal. That this is a spiritual universe, and yet here are a world of people in discord, in harmony, imprisonment, slavery, sin. Why? Because of their ignorance of the truth. Because of their judging by finite appearance. In the same way, it doesn't seem possible to you, I know, that it was only 500 years ago that Columbus crossed the ocean. It cannot seem possible to you that until 500 years ago, nobody would go very far from shore. You say, well, we don't think anything of that. Only a few generations ago, you would have been considered as brave as Christopher Columbus to have gone beyond the side of shore. Do you see that? It was their ignorance that kept the whole world away from them. They were in slavery to a few miles of ocean. And so it is, you will find ultimately that we are enslaved to 150 or 60 or 30 pounds of body. In the same way, we believe that the extension of our being is a few feet of body. And one of these days you will break through that limitation, and you will see that you are as unlimited as Christopher Columbus found the world to be unlimited. You will find that we individually are unlimited. We cannot be bound to any place, to any circumstance, to any condition. We are free being, and there are no limits, because we are consciousness. We are not body, we are conscious. We are instantaneously omnipresent here, there, and the other place the moment we rise above the limitation of a little piece of ocean, or the limitation of a little piece of body in which we are supposed to be living. Someday you'll see that the body lives in us. There is no more limit to our being than there is to our imagination. Our imagination is more near the real than what we call common sense. Because in our imagination, we wander back into the millions of years of past, and we can wander into the millions of years of future. That is why the visions have been so wonderful of the coming of the submarine, the coming of the airplane, because even though it took the form of mythology, they really were visions of the real. They were visions of people who could not be limited to just seeing what was going on around them in time and space. They had a faculty beyond that, and that faculty is consciousness. Now do you see that the moment that you can sit here and look at any thing or person that exists out there, and instead of withdrawing from it and dismissing it as illusion, come to the conclusion why it is. It is all that God is, that is. God expressing itself. God manifesting. You say, what? That's a cancer. I don't care what you're calling it. Who gave it labels? Adam. Adam gave it labels. Don't you give it a label. You just give it what it is life. It's an activity of life going on. It's an activity of consciousness going on. It's an activity of form going on. What it is, I don't know. Now, Father, illumine me. Then pretty soon you look up and you say, oh, before I saw through a glass darkly, and it looked like a cancer. Now I see face to face, and it is an offspring of God. Now that is the summary of this week's work. More than that, it is the summary of all the work since August, when the first side of a glass of syrup revealed the is. You will be tempted from this point on very greatly. You will be tempted not only because the world of appearance will still be outside when you go outside, but you will be doubly tempted because you have built up 5, 10, or 20 years of denying. 5, 10, or 20 years of declaring that it's an illusion, it isn't true. And that old education is going to come to tempt you too, to draw you back to a state of consciousness that in this week you've outgrown. But because you have outgrown it, doesn't mean that it won't tempt you. It is very often like when we are healed of smoking or drinking, and yet tomorrow or the next day we would like a cigarette or cigar, or we would like a little drink. We've been healed. But just that lingering temptation is there for just another one or another two. And so there is going to be the lingering temptation to go back to your metaphysical days of, oh, well, it's only an illusion, oh, well, it isn't real. Whereas what we are calling for is a very firm stand on the truth. It is real. It is so. It is an activity of consciousness. It is a formation of mind. It is. And stand on that is. No amount of standing on it will make it so. But it will bring you to seeing that it is so.